All right, I'm rolling.
All right. Reverend Watts, explain to me, I wasn't at the meeting the other day. I understand you've been somewhat instrumental in bringing this program to bear, is that right?
That's correct. I mean, for the past 3 months, August, September, and October, I went before the state school board requesting that they really address the school suspension issue, the school discipline issue. And I submitted a proposal to them that they create a pilot project on the west side of Charleston using the existing piece of legislation, Chapter 18, 312, the Community Development School Pilot Program legislation, and just designate these schools, Community Development School Pilot Program schools, and then use it as a model to create a template for the rest of the state. And they are acting upon that request.
And of course, this, as you were explaining to me a minute ago, this is a little bit different than initially what you asked for, but you're very supportive of it.
I'm excited about it. It's not exactly what I asked for, but you take what you can get. And we're very excited that we feel like this state school board has heard us as we've been articulating some of our concerns about educational challenges facing low-income children around the state, and particularly the west side of Charleston. And we feel like this superintendent, Superintendent Roach, has also heard us. So they had a program that they already implemented in other counties. It's called Communities in School, where the State Department places a professional person called a local school coordinator in the school to coordinate services for the children and their parents. And so they're going to be expanding this program on the west side of Charleston. And we're excited about that because we think it's complementary to some programs that we already have and to a plan that we're developing.
Sounds good. And I understand this program is already in place, I think, at Westside Middle and Mary C. Snow, is that right?
That's correct. They were already at Mary C. Snow Westside Elementary, and I think they've just recently placed a coordinator at Westside Middle. And I understand the plan now is they're going to place a coordinator at Grandview Elementary School and one at Edgewood Elementary. And I think there will be one or maybe two coordinators working out of Capitol High School, one to kind of coordinate the overall activity of all the schools, and then one to sort of work directly with my little organization and other community-based organizations to help coordinate these services.
Why is it so important that they take this approach?
I think it's important for it to take this approach is because this community is overstressed. The families are overwhelmed, and we have a long history of low academic performance of the students and of the schools. Right now, for example, Edgewood Elementary is ranked about 276 out of 375 elementary schools statewide. Grandview is ranked about 307 out of 375. Piedmont, which also feeds into us on the west side, is ranked 370 out of 375. And Mary C. Snow is ranked 374 out of 375. And then Westside Middle is ranked 169 out of 169 schools. It's not just for lack of effort on behalf of the principals, the teachers, the counselors, and all the staff. It's just the challenge that this community faced over the years, basically, has lowered the educational level of the entire community. And so now it would take strategic action and strategic investments to provide these students and their families with more supports to strengthen and stabilize the families so the families can build resiliency in the children, and the children come to school motivated to learn, well-behaved, well-rested, well-fed, and well-kept. It's just a comprehensive approach and not just a single silver bullet which doesn't exist. So you got to have a comprehensive approach to addressing a community's challenge like the west side of Charleston.
And what I was taken aback by a little bit was, that I thought was, sorry, my light turned on there, was this is a whole of school approach in the sense that you're going from elementary all the way to high school. How will that impact the west side?
Well, that really is the key. We know that the primary educators of any human being really is their parents, the first and primary educator. So we can start with prenatal, making sure that all pregnant mothers are getting proper prenatal care and that we're delivering healthy babies and that they're in healthy early childhood development programs. You look at statistics and it says children from low-income communities come to preschool with maybe about a 5,000 word vocabulary, whereas kids from more affluent maybe have 10 to 15,000, right? So educational opportunities, educational exposure at the earliest possible levels is important. Whether or not kids are exposed to trauma, where they're exposed to child abuse and on neglect. All these things affect their brain's development and how they learn and process information. So if we're going to lift the education performance of the students, we got to start with prenatal, and we have to have a system from prenatal all the way through to provide them with support. But we also got to be looking at what can we do to lift the education levels of the parents. And in this community, a lot of the grandparents, because they're still the primary educators. So that's why there's a group of us for 3 years, having worked with Ms. Sharon Lansdale, Center for Rural Health Development, and to develop a comprehensive community health improvement plan for the west side of Charleston. It should be completed by mid-December. And what they're going to be doing at the school fits nicely into our plan, because we're looking at a comprehensive approach from prenatal all the way through to senior citizens, as well as job training, workforce development, economic development, social service coordination, how we address some of the other challenges in the community of high crime and those things like that. So that's really what it takes. It's no secret that you go to South Hills and you have some of the highest performing schools in the state of West Virginia, perennially, every year. And at almost all the kids from George Washington High School going to college or post-secondary education. It's a healthier community. It's a more affluent community. It has a higher level of college graduates, a higher level of professional people. It doesn't have the crime and the violence. It doesn't have this slum and blighted housing. It does not have all of those negative things, really, that pulls the community down and that affects the children. No slight to them, we're happy for them. But we believe that we can create an education renaissance on the west side of Charleston. This is not something we thought about yesterday. I've been working on this since 1999. We've moved pieces of legislation in the past, 2004, 2010, 2013, that was never implemented or executed as intended. So this is the first time that we've had a state board of education and a state superintendent that heard what we were saying and said, okay, we're going to do something. We're not just going to ignore you and stiff arm you. We're going to do something. And we think that's the beginning. And once they put their foot into the water, once they come into this community, they're going to be surprised. No community in the state of West Virginia has a commitment from the community, the churches, the nonprofit organizations, to supporting families over here. And when people realize what some of these nonprofit organizations have been doing for years, they're going to be incredibly surprised and amazed. And it's not because of a lack of effort. What we've not had is the right investment. So these nonprofits work on shoestring budgets, right? But they've continued to sustain their work. But now we got a more comprehensive plan, and we think it's going to attract some funding for the Bob Burdette Center, for the Midian Center, for the Boys and Girls Club, for the New Covenant Development Corporation, and other nonprofits that's been pulling the slate over here for a long period of time. So as much as anything, we want exposure. We want them to see that this community is committed to educating the children, and with key partners and with strategic investments, we believe that we can produce an education renaissance, and we believe the west side of Charleston can be a model and serve as a template for the rest of the state.
You said there a few moments ago that you've never really had the investment. Nearly $400,000 in the first year. What kind of investment is that going to provide here? What kind of difference is that going to make?
It's going to make a huge difference, significant, because they're going to be investing with professional people. And primarily that money will go toward the salaries and benefits of these local coordinators. There will be professionals. I know the person they've assigned to Mary C. Snow. She's an educator par excellence. She's going to be the coordinator there. She's working on a PhD in education, right? So now she's going to be there working with that principal and that staff, coordinating things and bringing all the community people together. I describe it, Curtis, as being like what we've had in this community is like having the most expensive and sophisticated computer hardware system and all of the software that money could buy, but you couldn't afford the operating system. Right? So nothing worked and there was no intelligence. And I think these coordinators will provide a role of managing what I call the white spaces, right? Of managing the systems. And then if they do what the superintendent said they're going to be charged to do, to work with us, to work with the community and to coordinate the activities with the community. From birth to age 19, a child spends 9% of the time at school and 91% of the time somewhere else. From the time they go to school to they graduate, 18% of the time at school, 82% of the time somewhere else. At best, a kid goes to school 180 days out of the year. only for about 6 or 7 hours. The other 18 hours are somewhere else. That's what I've been trying to say for years, right? It matters what they do at the school, but what they do at the school is not enough. It has to be a partnership with the community, because these kids spend the majority of their time in their homes and in the community when the schoolhouse is closed and shut down or doing all the summer months.
And I want to jump into that here in just one moment. I want to get back to one other question I asked. I know you spent some time talking about prenatal and right on. I mean, there's a lot of that. But this program looks all the way from elementary to high school.
Yes.
And it seems, and you know a lot more about this than I do, but the idea of a comprehensive approach, taking the kid all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade, that seems like it's a good idea.
That's what has to be done. If we don't do that, then we will not increase or improve the educational performance of low-income children and of the marginalized children. They will fall through the cracks. So we're glad that they're making the commitment at elementary, at middle, and at high school. As a community, we're saying we got to back all the way up to prenatal, and we got to go beyond high school, right? Because if we can influence parents and their older siblings to get everyone to buy into this vision that we're going to raise the education level of our community, then we think that that would create the synergy necessary to really move our community forward.
Now, I understand West Middle and Mary C. Snow already have coordinators assigned. They've already been involved. Are you aware of what those programs have done to this extent and what success they've already shown?
Well, they haven't been there long because they just got these positioned this year. So I don't know if they've been there a month or so yet, so it hasn't been a long period of time. I know the type of things they're doing. You know, they're trying to work with the teachers, the counselors, the principals to identify the children that have needs. In this community, every month, some families are being evicted from their homes. You drive through and you'll see their belongings out on the street. So I know they're working to try to help parents avoid evictions. I think they're working to try to help people find the type of mental health or additional counseling their child may not need that the school is not equipped to provide. I know that these schools work extensively to make sure our children are well fed. I happened to stop by Westside Middle yesterday evening. At the end of the day, I was dropping off some books for Miss Krista Mullins and for her vice principal I want them to take a look at. And Miss Steele was on the phone and giving the pardon announcements, have a great weekend, enjoy the holiday. Hey, and by the way, there are bags of meals that you can pick up as you're leaving. So every week, they provide meals at the end of the school week so the kids can take food home, right? So they're doing things like that. So they're responding to what I call the felt needs. What are the needs that the children feel and have and their parents, and they're trying to address some of those needs.
So then this program here, the expansion here will include Grandview, Edgewood, and then Capitol.
That's correct.
And what the word I keep seeing repeated through there is feeder, that these are everything's being fed into Capitol. And it's really all encompassing on the west side. This touches every part of the west side, is that right?
It does, almost. But you got to start somewhere. And I'm glad you raised that question. You see, Westside Middle School may be the most complicated middle school in the state of West Virginia. You know why? There are 8 elementary schools to feed in the Westside Middle. And most people don't realize that, right? Well, maybe there's 6. You've got the schools on the west side, Grandview, you got Edgewood, you got Mary C. Snow. And then you also have Piedmont. Most of those children from the east end come to the west side of Charleston, particularly their low-income children. And you got some of the children from Ruffner Elementary. And you have some of the children from Shoals Elementary. So 6 elementary schools feed in. So what happens is a lot of these low-performing children that have been in 6 different elementary schools, now they all feed in the west side middle. So if you don't address the challenges of these children at the elementary level, there's no way that Westside Middle can overcome that in the 3 years that they have them. And then you find the same phenomenon as you roll into Capitol High School, maybe the most complicated high school in the state, because it has Westside Middle feeding in, it has Horace Mann feeding in, it has some of the kids from the Elk View area feeding in. And so it's complicated, the diverse mixture of kids that comes in the Capitol, and they have one of the highest percentage of low-income children that come into that school. So that's why you got to recognize this feeder approach, and you've got to back up as far as you can in the system to start working with the kids, so when they feed into the middle and feed into the high school, they're better prepared to be successful. As their schoolwork becomes more complicated, as they're expected to work more independently, and as they have less support, because you don't have the type of support at the middle and high school level that you have at the elementary school level.
But this gets some of that special attention to the west side that's been needed for a while, is that right?
Exactly. It gets some of the special attention to the west side that has been needed, and it brings into full view, right? I keep trying to get people to realize that a problem well defined is a problem half solved, as Dr. Charles F. Kettering would say. And until we recognize the magnitude, we don't respond with the level of commitment. So as long as we keep trying to mask the problems facing West Side students, as long as we're not talking about the high disciplinary referral rates, the suspension rates, as long as we're not talking about the fact that our schools perennially rank toward the bottom when compared to other schools around the state, then we never respond with the type of commitment and the effort over a sustained period of time. So I'm already appealing to the state board. You guys need to be thinking about a 5-year commitment. It can't be just a 1 year and we're done, right? Because this problem has existed for a long time. And so we need a 5-year commitment to get first graders all the way to middle school, get middle school kids all the way into high school, right? And to get some of these kids that are just coming into preschool further along in their elementary school education. But this is a great first start. And I commend President Hardesty for keeping his word and for Superintendent Roach for responding quickly with this plan. And we think with this commitment from the State Board of Education and the State Department, we now can appeal to the business community. They're the major beneficiaries, right, of the product that's produced by the public school system. We have the lowest labor force participation rate in the United States of America, and we've had the distinction almost every year for the last 45 years, right? So there are not enough people, right? I'll close with this. There are 4 recent reports that suggest a crisis in public education in the state of West Virginia, but few people, civic leaders, business leaders, and even educators are connecting these dots. The first report, July 24th, the State School Discipline Report, 32,000 student school suspended every year. Low-income children, majority of those suspended. Kids with disabilities, kids in the foster care children, and African-American children. So that's the one report. Second report, State School, the Board of Education released the test scores. Our test scores are still well below the pre-pandemic period, statewide. The third report from Higher Education Policy Commission, 2021 college, high school graduates, only 45% of the students who graduated from high school the 2021 school year went on to post-secondary education. Only 31% of low-income children. It prompted the Chancellor of the Higher Education Policy Commission, Dr. Sarah Sue Tucker, to say, look, this is a crisis. We're not going to be able to fill the jobs of college graduates as a result of baby boomers retiring and other people retiring, right? The fourth report was the National Association of Education Progress report released a couple of weeks ago. West Virginia had the steepest decline in the academic performance of its children on the NAEP test of any other state in the United States of America. They hadn't tested since 2019 because of the COVID interruption. And we're next to last nationally below New Mexico. I mean, just above New Mexico. This is statewide. And when you consider the west side is toward the bottom in West Virginia, that's not a good sign.
You are also part of the HOPE, is it the HOPE Community Development Corporation, is that correct?
That is correct.
What is your role with HOPE Community Development Corporation?
Well, I'm the president, I'm the CEO, I'm the janitor, the custodian, the chief bottle washer.
I understand. And how is that corporation, how is your guys' group going to be working with this partnership?
We work with the partnership in that we will be the lead community-based organization that will work with the local coordinators that's placed in each of these schools to help coordinate the services of other local nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, other groups that do this type of work. My little organization, my little staff, we did a mapping of probably close to 100 groups that provide different services. And we have put it into a matrix to say, okay, here's everybody that does housing. Here's who works on utility assistance. Here's the group that does tutoring. Here's the health, mental health professionals, right? Here's the people involved in emergency food distribution. So we create this matrix to where we know who the people are and where they are and what it is that they do. And so we're creating a youth and family services clearinghouse. We're trying to finalize an agreement on a piece of software that will allow us to be able to manage all of this, right? And so we'll be able to see, okay, this person was referred to this organization. They've made that contact. So that's our role, to help coordinate with the school coordinators and with the community, the coordination of services.
But how will this look in regards to what will your role be in this partnership?
I'm telling you, we're gonna have a physical place at 1039 Central Avenue. It'll be a part of our larger center. And one of the projects there will be the Youth and Family Services Clearinghouse. We'll have a staff of people that's located there. They'll be visiting schools and meeting with coordinators. Coordinators will be calling them to say, we need this for this parent or for this family, for this student. We'll be making contact with those who provide the services to make those connections. We will be the intelligence, right? People call me every day looking for stuff. They know I've been serving this community, you know, for almost 40 years. And they know that I know a lot of things that's going on, but it can't just be in my head. It's got to be in a system that other people can access and take advantage of.
And that $400,000 that we're talking about, is that largely to help fill the salaries of these coordinators?
Yes, not a dime of that money comes to my organization. We got to raise our own money.
Yeah,
they will not fund us.
And when does this start? Did you get an indication of that?
It started. They have coordinators at Mary C. Snow, and they have coordinators at Westside Middle. So I guess they will go to a process, you know, of hiring the other people and getting other positions filled. And I would think that it would be up and running smoothly, probably right after the Christmas break.
And just for the average viewer at home doing this, what is this going to do in the life of, or the education of the child? How, paint a picture for me with words as to exactly how is this going to change education of the students leaving those schools?
Well, my hope, you know, and my vision is that children will be inspired to learn, like kids were when I was going to school back in the early 60s. I hope that children will have a sense that there are people that care about me, and there's more than one person that cares about me. There's a caring community of adults that care about me, and they're invested in me. And in return, the children will say, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to put forth my best effort. As I tell children all the time here at my church in the neighborhood, I'll work hard for you. I'll fight for you. I can do the best I can. But what I can't do is I can't bring the want to. You got to want to get an education. You got to want to reach your full potential. You got to want to be the best that you can be. And you got to eliminate every excuse that you will give yourself or every excuse that someone else will give to you. Because if someone is in a much worse situation than you, they got the want to and they're being educated.
And it's your belief that this money coming in, these coordinators coming in, working with your group and things is going to inspire or give that inspiration?
I think it's a part of a solution. And I don't want to overstate this. This is important, but it's only a part of a solution. We believe that our plan, and when people see our plan, that our plan really fleshes out how what they're proposing to do can be more effective and more efficient. They're going to be in this community at best 180 days, as I said earlier. They're going to leave at 3 or 4 o'clock every day. They're not going to be on weekends. They're not going to be on. They're not going to be here during the summers. It's our plan that we're putting together to have a comprehensive approach 365 days out of the year. And so what they're doing will give us a strategic connection to the school, and we'll know there's someone that's working in the school to try to work with this population of kids that needs help. So it's bigger than what, I always say, everybody overestimate what the schools can do. They think that if you just put something at the school, it's going to make it work. Sometimes putting everything at the school bogs the school down, doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. So they can't do what they need to do. So there's certain things that need to be done at the community level. And we think that this will create the proper balance.
In short, you've got to be excited.
I'm very excited. I'm hopeful. I always remain hopeful. Because as Brian Stevenson always says, that we got to remain hopeful because hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And you never make any progress if you lose hope. Because hope is the fuel. Hope is the energy that calls you to get up every morning and keep putting forth an effort and keep trying to move something even though it might seem to be insurmountable. There's one thing I like was to touch on before you leave, right? and this is maybe a part of another story that you'll follow up on, is that it's my opinion that student school suspensions is what I refer to as a silent, underlying social condition that's driving, that's unrecognized and unaddressed, and it's driving many of our educational challenge. It contributes to many of our social problems. But because it's been normalized into the system, we accept it as being normal, but it really isn't normal, it's really kind of abnormal. And over time, it is undereducating large number of children that are normally concentrated in low-income communities. So it becomes almost impossible to move that community forward because the education level in the community is so low. And a community cannot rise any higher than the education level of its residents. So here's what school suspension contribute to. First of all, they contribute to school absences. So of course the kids are excluded from school during that period. Because these suspension days are unexcused absences, they contribute to truancy. Because once a kid gets 10 days of unexcused absence, they're truant. Once they are determined to be truant, then they can have a status offense filed against them by the school and their parents, brings them into the juvenile justice system. So now they're in the juvenile justice system. Once in that system, you have a tendency to progress because now you've been supervised and you can be penalized for things that weren't a crime, but you just didn't obey the rules of the probation officer. It contributes to kids getting frustrated and dropping out of school because they fall so far behind, and there's an achievement gap. There's research that says it contributes to the school-to-prison pipeline. A recent report 2 years ago by Bowling Green State University, Eastern Kentucky University, 7,000 student longitudinal study. School suspension is the #1 factor that predicts who's going to go to prison. It contributes to unemployment and to underemployment, right? It contributes to systemic generational poverty. Right? It locks people into a system. Every pathology starts with something or a combination of things. And what I'm suggesting that this is, the suspension is the silent underlying condition, unrecognized and unaddressed. And for 7 years, we've been unable to really get a public conversation about it, even though there's a plethora of reports that's been released. Since 2015, when I started my deep dive into that, even the State Department of Education have their own reports, which point out that it's a pretty serious problem. But the latest report, I believe, has tremendous value. The State School Discipline Report, released on July the 24th to the Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability, because what it does, it unmasks the problem. Up to this point, the problem had been masked. And the Department of Justice out of Washington, University of Pennsylvania's study, and other reports, they were just looking at the disproportionate rate of discipline and suspension of African American children. So the State Department of Education did reports back in 14 and 15. And they had the data that said that black students were suspended at twice the rate of whites. But they said it's a national phenomenon. So we're not doing any worse than anybody else. So no actions was taken to address it. I then went to the Cultural Center and I found research as far back as 1976. This was looked at, right, by the Western Human Rights Commission. And a little report was compiled. They looked just on in Kanawha County. And it's ironic that in 1976, and they didn't revisit in 1980, the black students in Kanawha County were being suspended at 2.5 times the rate of whites, which is basically what it is today. Now think about that. This has been going on for all those years. But what this report does, because the legislation passed in 2020, Senate Bill 723, addressing school discipline in Western public schools, required the Department of Education to compile, analyze, and disaggregate the data. Now this is what it's really illuminating. That is, with the 32,000 student school suspensions annually, there's nearly 70% of the lower income students. Now it's a socioeconomic thing. So if it's a socioeconomic thing in 70%, that means that it has really affected a large number of low income white children. And that hasn't been discussed in the past. Secondly, the report shows that children with disabilities are being disproportionately suspended at 1.8 times their percent representation in the student population, right? Whereas poor kids, 1.4 times their representation. But what really was eye-opening to everybody was that children in the child foster care system are being suspended at 3.1 times their representation. So this issue is affecting low-income and marginalized children. And now we know that it's not just the incorrigible, disrespectful, unruly black kids that's been suspended, but instead it's kids that are low-income and marginalized. So the last thing I would say about this, and the reason this is so important, is that when you look at the fact that we have one of the highest juvenile incarceration rates in the country, even though we don't have a high juvenile crime rate, and it's been driven by the kids being suspended, being brought into the juvenile justice system. We have one of the highest adult incarceration rates, even though we have a crime rate is probably in the lowest top 10, it's in the lowest crime rate. We have one of the highest incarceration rates, even though our population is aging and declining, right? But we're still seeing our prisons filled and our jails being filled, right? And then we have the lowest labor force participation rate. And when you look at it, you'll see we're the lowest college going rate, that we're undereducating so many kids, and they're ending up on a road that will lead to unemployment, underemployment, jail, prison, systemic generational poverty. And I suggest to the elected officials in this state and to the business community, if you take a look at this, you're going to find until we address student school suspensions, we're not going to see a significant improvement in education levels because there's too many kids that's affected by this. We're not going to see an improvement in labor force participation. We're not going to see a reduction in our prison population or our juvenile population. This is the underlying silent social condition, unrecognized and unaddressed. I've been talking about it and I've been writing about it for 7 years, and it's still yet to be addressed. And at the Legislative Oversight on Education Accountability meeting, interim meeting, July 24, when the state school board representative gave the report, the legislators didn't ask a single question, not one. Nor did they ask, where's the plan? Because the legislation in 2020 required a plan to be developed, and that plan to be reported on in 2022, and every year, 2 years after that. So that's what I'm trying to say. Some issues don't get addressed, and when they're not addressed, they continue to be compounded and exacerbated over time, and we never get to root causes that's contributing to downstream problems. So,
last thing I have, and like I say, we may very well get in some of that at another time. And
sure.
Last thing I have, do you have just bullets for what you think this investment's going to do in the schools? How it's going to make the kids' lives different? Well, just some bulleted ideas of what you think this is going to produce.
Well, if it's executed as they say is designed, then children should be connected more quickly to the support service that they need. I don't know what that might be, but it's supposed to be individualized based on the need of the child and the need of that family. So that's what we expect. Secondly, if it works as designed, then they will be notifying those of us in the community so that we can follow up with the children and with their families so that we can connect them with additional services in the community. There's no silver bullet. This is complicated, right? And there's no one pill that we can give to a child to make it work. But what we can do, we can create a system, right? A system of support, responding to the needs that they manifest. So if a kid is a disciplinary problem, rather than immediately sending them home, let's sit down and talk to that child. Let's bring the family in. Let's try to figure out what's going on with this child. You see what I'm saying? Bringing
groups like yourself and things like that to help. And it's really a community. It's a community approach.
It's a community approach. I'll give you an anecdotal story. I went to a school.
Hold on, did you have